We are officially in the halfway point of the NFL season and of course the college football season. And with that said, a lot of us have already started to look forward into the offseason. And a major part of the offseason is going to be the 2025 quarterback draft class. And I gotta be honest with you guys, it is a very weak class. So in today's video, I want to go through the 2025 quarterback draft class while also talking about which NFL teams actually should be considering taking a quarterback and what those teams could potentially do. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button, but let's go ahead and hop right into it. And we are going to begin this video off by briefly just covering the 2025 quarterback draft class because it's pretty darn weak. As of right now, I would say the number one clear overall prospect in this upcoming draft is Shedeur Sanders. Say what you want about Shedeur. I know there's a lot of controversy with him. I personally believe a lot of that controversy is a little bit just idiotic. I think he's a very talented quarterback. I wouldn't say that he is a generational talent per se, but I do think he's got a good arm. He's very accurate. I think his athleticism is there, and I think he does well inside the pocket. The only real downside with Shedeur is that he holds the ball incredibly long, but I actually do think that he's a really solid prospect. Then after Shedeur Sanders, it gets pretty damn weak because I think next up is probably Cam Ward, and he is a very raw player. Now, Cam Ward is an electric player. He can make some big time plays, but I just don't know if he's quite yet there as a pure thrower of the football, if you get my point. Yes, he can make some spectacular throws. He can make some big plays with his legs, and I will say he is probably the best just pure baller of this class. But I also do believe that there is a lot of concerning features about him as a player. He also really only has had one major year of success, and that is this most recent year with Miami. Of course, he was a good quarterback prior to transferring to Miami, but now is really where he's been rising up the draft boards. But I will say he is a good athlete. He's got good size, and I think he's got a strong arm, so I definitely do think he'll make it into the first round. And so those are like the two top quarterbacks, and then after those two, I think there is an insane drop-off between those top two guys, because next up, I would say at number 3 is probably Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Now, Nussmeier has good arm talent. He's a good quarterback. He does some good decision making. I just don't know what his upside really is. He's from LSU, which has produced guys like Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, but I'm not even sure if he's actually going to come out in this year's draft because he's only been a starter for 1 year. So the fact that he is my number 3 guy and has only played like 7 games just kind of tells you how bad this quarterback draft class really is outside the top 2. Because then outside of Garrett Nussmeier, who I'm not even sure is actually going to be a part of the 2025 quarterback draft class, I would say next up is probably Carson Beck. My issue with Carson Beck is that he just doesn't have insane upside. I think he is an incredibly safe pick, and I think that he is a borderline starter to backup level quarterback at the NFL level. Now, he's got some good qualities. I think his decision making is particularly solid in certain spots, though lately it hasn't been. I also think for the most part he's fairly accurate. I think his processing inside the pocket is pretty sharp. Again, the big issue for him is that I just don't know if his upside is a high level starting quarterback in the NFL. He sort of reminds me a little bit, and I don't think he's as bad as this player, but I think he's on like a similar level, probably a little bit better, of like a Desmond Ridder with Atlanta, to where he isn't necessarily going to lose you a bunch of games, but he isn't going to be the reason why you win games. If you're going to draft Carson Beck, I think you have to have an insane roster around him. He'd have to go to a team like San Francisco, and they're obviously not taking a quarterback. Then after Carson Beck, I would probably say it's Quinn Ewers. Now, Quinn Ewers has got insane potential. He's extremely raw, but I don't know, man. There is a lot of flaws to Quinn's game. Number one, he is maybe the most unathletic quarterback I'll be talking about in this video. Not saying that he's not a good athlete, but we're talking about a guy who is not a very fast guy. He doesn't move around in the pocket very well. And when you talk about a baller like Cam Ward, Quinn Ewers is simply not that. Now, Quinn has insane arm talent, but he's not very accurate with that arm talent, especially deep. I would say intermediate and short throws, he's pretty darn accurate. And my big concern for Quinn Ewers is how is he outside of a Steve Sarkisian system? In the Sarkisian system, he's incredible, but what happens when he goes out there and has to make his own plays and be his own man? Those are big questions that I don't think you want to have for a first-round quarterback, so I don't think he's going to go in the first round. Then there's some other names like Jalen Milroe, Connor Wegman, Dylan Gabriel, Miller Moss. Some of those guys may not come out in the NFL draft, like, for example, Miller Moss, maybe even Jalen Milroe, but those guys have some talent. I just don't think they're going to be drafted in, like, the first 2 or 3 rounds. Of those guys, I think Jalen Milroe has the best chance of going early just because he's extremely raw and extremely athletic, and I think teams are looking at Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels and seeing a guy like Jalen Milroe who they potentially could develop and work with. But again, he's extremely raw as a passer, so I don't know if there's a lot of people who want to take on that mission of fixing him as a thrower. So as you can see, there's not a bunch of really good quarterbacks in this draft class. Now, I do think at least 2 will go in the first round, but because there are a bunch of teams that actually need a quarterback, I wouldn't be shocked at all if 3 or 4 were to move into the first round just based off of pure talent and potential, and because there's a lot of teams that actually need quarterbacks. So now you're asking yourself, well, which teams actually need quarterbacks? Well, I have about 8 teams that I think personally do need quarterbacks, and we'll kind of go at them individually and talk about which quarterbacks I think actually fit their system. The number 1 team we're going to talk about, and these are in no particular order, I'm just doing it based off of division. We're going to begin with the AFC East, and I think the number 1 team that needs a quarterback is the New York Jets. I think for the Jets, you're just looking for a guy who you can groom under Aaron Rodgers for at least 1 year, and then he can come in probably in 2026 or 7 and be the starting quarterback. I've said this for a while, but I actually think that Quinn Ewers is actually a very solid fit for the New York Jets. He's got similar arm talent to Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, he is nowhere near the processor of the field of Aaron Rodgers, but when it comes down to arm talent, I do think Quinn actually stacks up pretty well. I also do think that the system in which Nathaniel Hackett runs and the system that Garrett Wilson has been running with this New York Jets team, I actually think could be a good fit for Quinn Ewers. Again, for me, the big thing with this one is that you're going to be sitting down for a year behind Aaron Rodgers, developing with him and grooming underneath him, which I will say Quinn Ewers is one of those quarterbacks who does get better every single year. At least we've seen that so far in Texas, so I think he could easily do that for the New York Jets. This would also be a pick where you don't have to spend a whole bunch of draft capital on him because he'd probably go later in the draft, like a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round pick. So if you're the New York Jets, maybe you don't want to invest a 1st round pick on a quarterback, so maybe you will do so in the 2nd or 3rd or 4th rounds on a guy who has some potential who can actually be good. My big concern for Quinn in this system, though, is I kind of feel like he's pretty similar to Zach Wilson in some qualities, but I think he's a better quarterback than Zach. Then in the AFC North, I think the Cleveland Browns are the clear team that needs a new quarterback. Deshaun Watson is not working for them, and they currently are starting Jameis Winston. Now, barring Jameis just going on an absolute tear to end the season off and looking like their franchise quarterback, which we'll wait and see on that one, I still think this team should draft a quarterback regardless. I think for this team, this is a team that needs to find a win-now quarterback, a guy who can step in right away and play at a very high level. Unfortunately, there's really only 1, maybe 3 guys at most. So for this Browns team, I would probably suggest Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, or Garrett Nussmeier to be your starting quarterback. And if you want to go even lower than that, maybe Carson Beck. This is a Browns team that's pretty darn talented, so I think they would want a guy who can step in immediately and make an immediate impact, even if he's not as good as like a Tom Brady, obviously. You're looking for a guy who can just step in there, play a role, and play at a high level, and I think those guys are probably your best bet to do so. I don't think this Browns team needs a Superman at quarterback, so I don't really love the idea of Milroe or even, honestly, Cam Ward. They just need a guy who can get the ball to their playmakers and, just not turn the ball over. Then in the AFC South, I'm looking at the Tennessee Titans. Listen, Will Levis just simply has not worked for this team. I do believe that Will Levis will get a second chance in the NFL, at least at some point, but I don't think it should be with this Titans team. They've looked abysmal on offense this year, whether it's been Will Levis or Mason Rudolph, so I do think drafting a quarterback is definitely in the realm of possibility for this team. That being said, I think of all the teams I'm going to talk about, this might be the one team that shouldn't draft a quarterback because the team is just really void of talent in a lot of other positions, but I can see them definitely going down that route. I think for Tennessee, I would love to see Tennessee just draft a pure baller, somebody who is different from the Ryan Tannehills and the Will Levises of the world. I think Cam Ward could really make a spark down there in Tennessee. You look at a guy like what Jaden Daniels has done with the Washington Commanders, and I think that's exactly what could happen with Cam Ward and the Tennessee Titans. Now, I'll say this, Cam Ward is not the type of quarterback that Jaden Daniels is. Jaden Daniels is by far the better prospect. But if you're looking for a guy who's just a pure baller who can make some big plays and can flash his potential early, I think Cam Ward would actually be a really solid fit for this Titans team, especially because they're really lacking talent on that roster. So if you're lacking talent, go get you an extremely talented quarterback that can make some plays even if he's not surrounded by insane amounts of talent. Then in the AFC West, I think the Las Vegas Raiders are clearly the team that needs a quarterback. I don't think you rock into next year with Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew. I think both those guys need to be gone. And I think for Las Vegas, this is a really interesting one. Obviously, they've had some conversations already with Shedeur Sanders, so I think that's definitely where they're probably leaning. And I actually do like the fit of Shedeur in Las Vegas. Outside of Shedeur, who is going to be hard for this Raiders team to get, but I don't think it's necessarily impossible for them to do so, I would say that maybe a guy like Carson Beck would be a good fit, but I think he's pretty similar to Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, so I'm going to stick with Shedeur Sanders here. I think Las Vegas just needs a really good, smart quarterback that isn't going to turn the ball over, but is also going to be aggressive when necessary. And I think that's exactly what Shedeur Sanders could bring. Now, for Shedeur, obviously, he's not going to have Travis Hunter or all those other studs that they have at Colorado in the receiving core, but there is some really good players around him, guys like Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, and many others. So if you get a guy like Shedeur Sanders to put into that spot, I think it'd be a really solid fit. Not to mention, Tom Brady is a part owner of the team, so you're talking about Shedeur, Brady time. I mean, what are we talking about? It's a perfect fit. Then in the NFC East, you're looking at the New York Giants. They've got to get a new quarterback. Daniel Jones just simply isn't the guy. Unfortunately, though, for the New York Giants, I don't really know who is a good fit on this team. I'm probably going to go back to Cam Ward on this one, and I'll also throw in Jalen Milroe. This is a Giants team that just needs a dude. They just need a baller. They just need a guy who can go in there and make some big, flashy plays that right now you're not getting from Daniel Jones and you haven't gotten in many, many years. Go get you a guy who can make some big splashes. Go get you a guy who's athletic, who can use his legs, can be a playmaker with his own body, and you do all those fun things. You're not getting that out of Daniel Jones. You weren't getting that out of Eli Manning. Why not try it out now? You can go out there and spend like a 4th round pick on Jalen Milroe or a 1st round pick on Cam Ward, and I think that would help this team out immensely. Then in the NFC North, nobody needs a quarterback that is a really solid division. Then I look at the NFC South, and I'm going to say there's 2 teams in the NFC South that should at least consider a quarterback. And those are going to be the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers. Now for Carolina, you obviously do have Bryce Young, but it's been pretty clear that Bryce Young hasn't necessarily worked with your team. So if I'm Carolina, I'm not necessarily interested in drafting a quarterback because I would like to still believe in Bryce Young, but if there is a quarterback that were to fall to you, maybe you would consider taking a guy like a Cam Ward or a Jalen Milroe or a Shedeur Sanders. I don't really know what quarterback would be a good fit in Carolina because just frankly, I don't know if there's a quarterback that could succeed in Carolina right now. But if there was one guy who I think could find some success because of his playmaking ability and because of things we've already talked about in this video, it would be Cam Ward. And then for the Saints, I think the Saints actually have a pretty talented roster. And honestly, I don't even know if they necessarily need to draft a quarterback because they already have Derek Carr. But if I am the New Orleans Saints, I'm at least looking for a guy who can be the future quarterback for this team. I honestly don't think the Saints need to go out there and get a flashy quarterback. I would like a guy like, honestly, like a Quinn Ewers on this team. I think he'd be a solid fit. I also don't mind the fit of guys like Garrett Nussmeier, Shedeur Sanders, and Carson Beck. I just don't think the Saints team needs a Superman at quarterback. They just need a young guy who can go in there, get the ball to their playmakers, and hand the ball off to Alvin Kamara while not making mistakes, but also playing really effective football. This Saints team, when healthy, is actually pretty good, so I don't think that they should be terribly aggressive in pursuing some big name, quarterback in the offseason. Just go out there, get somebody who can develop alongside Derek Carr, and I think that'll be fine. And then lastly, in the NFC West, I think the LA Rams should at least start to consider drafting a replacement for Matthew Stafford. For Stafford, I think that he is likely going to finish out the rest of the season and then probably go into next year as his retirement year. I think at most he's got 2 more years in him, but I wouldn't be shocked if he were to retire as soon as this season ended, especially if this team doesn't make the playoffs. In terms of a replacement for him, I actually think that this would be a really solid spot for a guy like Carson Beck to go to. The system that he runs isn't terribly difficult, not to mention the obvious connection you could have of a Georgia quarterback in Matthew Stafford and a Georgia quarterback in Carson Beck. I think this would be a situation where the guy would sit behind Stafford for a year, learn underneath him, and develop alongside him. And I think of all the quarterbacks who could fit a similar style to what Matthew Stafford runs, I actually think Carson Beck might be the best one there. If not Carson, I like Shedeur Sanders in the system, but I don't think he'll be available for them. And I also do like Garrett Nussmeier in this system too. Again, I don't know if he's going to go into this year's draft, but if he were to, I think LA would be a good fit for him. But my last little point that I do want to bring up real quickly before we end off the video is that there isn't a bunch of high quality quarterbacks that I think should be starters in the NFL, at least in this draft class, at least immediately. So I do believe that there's going to be guys like Jameis Winston, Trey Lance, maybe even some guys like Justin Fields, Bryce Young, Will Levis, those type of players who haven't been given insane opportunities. I wouldn't be shocked if those guys get moved around and shuffled around in the NFL and become starting quarterbacks for at least another year. Because I think there's going to be some teams that are going to look at guys like Geno Smith and Sam Darnold and decide that they want to give another guy another chance to see what he can actually do. And so if that is the case, I don't necessarily know which teams would be involved in that, but let's say, for example, a team like the New York Giants want a, established quarterback who they know maybe could be something. Maybe they go out there and trade for a guy like Bryce Young or Will Levis and try them out for a year. I'm not saying that's exactly what is going to happen, but I look at this upcoming 2025 draft class and I think it's just a little bit weaker compared to previous years. So I think there's going to be more teams that are inclined to try out already established NFL guys and see if they can work them into their system and see if they actually fit into their system with those guys. But that's the last little point I wanted to make. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.